Gardening is actually quite predictable when you think about it. If you think about the routine and the scheduling and the planning that goes into gardening, and it all happens cyclically, there's something that's very rhythmic and satisfying about that. And by understanding the science of what you're working with, you can truly make it an art form, make gardening an art form. And I think that that's probably my favorite part about gardening, and particularly about young plant growing and seed starting. And so today in this session, what we are going to discuss and talk about is how you can strategize your own seed starting schedule with ease, like a pro. And so I've got a few resources in front of me. I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to walk you through some of the key takeaways, the steps you need to know to be successful at strategizing your seed starting schedule. So where do you even begin when you are building a strategic seed starting schedule? Well, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you where to begin. It's always best to start at the end and work your way backwards. So, what is the end? The end is when you would like to plant your garden. So, how do you determine when you want to plant your garden? That is the next logical sequence of thought. It has to do with the last average frost date. So, I'm pulling out my handy dandy hardiness zone map. And sometimes the hardiness zone maps have the average last frost date in your zone listed. Sometimes they don't. Google is a very helpful resource to find your last average frost. I am in zone 6 in south central Kansas, and 6B in particular, if you've got a map with subdivisions. And it says that my last average frost is between April 18 and 30. So that means that anywhere between in that window of time, there could be a potential frost, which could be killing, and it could destroy my tomatoes if they get planted out during that time. So I'm always a safe gardener, and I like to wait to plant my garden until the danger of the last frost is completely past. So that would mean waiting till May 1st and beyond. And another reason I like to wait till that time is because I'm very busy in April. So if you can't get around to it, I always like to plan for a late planting. It's not going to affect your yield at all, especially even with tomatoes. So better safe than sorry, am I right? So end of April. So May 1st is my goal. So I'm going to whip out my trusty calendar here, my planner, and I'm going to look at when that falls in the week here. And this year, May 1st is a Monday, which actually that works well for me because my weekends are Monday, Tuesday. But for you, perhaps you would like a Saturday or a Sunday. So I would say April 29 or 30 would be an okay time for planting. Of course, if it's just rain, that might be rough too. So you always have to pay attention to your weather at the time. But April 29 and 30, that's a solid end date, solid planting date. So you're already well on your way to building your seed starting strategic schedule. So you have your planting date now. You have the place where you can start now building off of, building your strategic schedule from. And the next step is to figure out how much time it's going to take to actually grow your plants indoors. So where do we begin even? Well, let's take a look at your seed packets. Let's take a look at what varieties you're growing and start from there. It's always a good idea to look at the information provided to you by the seed companies on the seed packet. And, you'd think there'd be some information that is helpful there. So, all right, let's take a look at this first packet I picked up here. This is a Tomato Growers Supply Company variety, Black Plum Tomato. All right, so let's see what they give us here. So we just saw the variety name. They've got the catalog number, so that's helpful for reordering for next year. They've got the seed count in here, so I know how many I've got to plant. And they've got this little paragraph just explaining what this variety is like. Small, elongated, oval fruits. That sounds great. It's a very tasty variety. Very helpful information when you are trying to plan out your seed starting schedule, right? No, no, not so much. But there is a number here, 82 days. What does that mean? They don't tell me what that means. Well, a seasoned gardener would tell you that that is the days to maturity number. So 82 days until this plant is mature. Well, what does mature mean? Does mature mean it's ready to transplant into your garden? Does that mean that it's going to take 82 days for my seedling to be transplantable? That's insane. That's a long time. Well, what does that number mean? What does days to maturity mean? Literally, it is giving you an average time for when your first harvest is going to be. And there's a little bit of controversy on when that day count actually starts. A lot of people say that days to maturity, you can measure it based on when you transplant your plant into your garden. So when you first plant it outdoors, then you can start that day count. And that's about how long you can estimate your first harvest is going to be. So 82 days after you plant your garden, this tomato will have fruit. Well, it's really just an average, and it's a little bit of a gray area, and that doesn't actually help you know when to start your seedlings indoors. So that number doesn't really do much, right? So there's nothing really on the seed packet that's going to help you know when to start your seeds, except for if, say, you're using this radish, for example, and radishes are directly sown into the ground outdoors after the last danger of frost. So sometimes seed packet can tell you if you need to direct sow it rather than start it indoors. But as far as indoor seed starting goes, your seed packet is probably not going to give you a lot of information. So let's just set that aside for the time being. Mainly what you need to know from your seed packets is the variety names. So how are you going to know when to start your seeds indoors? This is where I can come in handy for you. I have created this spring growing schedule chart here, and you can find it in your downloadable resources. And let me just walk you through what I have created here. So first of all, there's a space for the year date, so you can put what year you're planning for. I have the week numbers listed along the top of this graph, and that is because I didn't want to put dates on here. So this resource can be used year after year. It's a great template for you. And oftentimes your planners, calendars, and even your phones, your smartphones have the week numbers listed. And this is how horticulturists plan their seed starting every year. They plan it based on week number, not by actual date. So week number is there. I'm going to go ahead and highlight or star this week 17 because that is the week we planned on planting the garden. So that's what we're going to work back from. And then along the left here, I have the plant variety or cultivar, and you can just write the varieties that you are planning on seeding along that left column there. And then over to the right, this is the information that is very important for you to know. I have taken your basic vegetable and herb crops, and I have broken down what your indoor grow time is going to look like. So from the point of germination to transplant, this is the range of weeks you will need to grow them indoors, all right? So most vegetable crops, people will say, take about 6 weeks to start or to grow indoors before they're ready to be transplanted outside. But I find with artificial lighting, if you're growing under lights, sometimes it takes a little bit longer, especially if this is your first time starting seeds indoors. So I like to give you a little bit of a range. So 6 to 8 weeks to start tomatoes, brassicaceae crops, so like your broccoli and your cabbage, chard, okra, all of those can be started 6 to 8 weeks before your planting date. And when I say started, what I really mean, I should clarify, it's going to take them 6 to 8 weeks after your seedlings have germinated, all right? And we'll get to that here in a second. There are a couple of exceptions. So pepper and tomatillo, they both take a week to 2 weeks longer than most vegetable crops to bulk up, to really be strong enough to be transplanted. So I have that listed here. Then when you get to herbs, which a lot of people love to start herbs, it takes 10 to 12 weeks. So those are going to be the first things you're going to want to plant in your seed starting schedule. The only exception in the herb category, the main exception is basil. Basil is a faster crop. It's going to grow faster. And honestly, basil is one of those crops that it's a little finicky indoors. It doesn't like low light conditions that come with seed starting inside. So you might struggle with that one a little bit, just a heads up. So you might want to plant more seeds than what you're going to need plants in the end, just to plan ahead for losing a few plants along the way. That is just a little pro tip for you there. And then last on this list, I have greens. So your lettuce, arugula, radicchio, things aside from your cabbages and chards, because they're really fast crops, and you can direct sow them outside, but I like to get them started ahead to have some transplants to get them a good start. Make sure they're germinated well before transplanting. All right, so there are your basic vegetable and herb crops. If you're interested in floral crops, you can do a little bit of research, a little bit of digging online, but I also encourage you to be a Renata's Garden Club member, because if you have any questions about starting floral crops, you can just shoot me a text or an email and I will be happy to help there. All right, so let's do an example here. Let's say that I have a tomato variety. We're gonna do the black plum variety from my seed packet. So I'm just gonna write that here in the top row. And then I'm gonna find my planting date, and I'm going to count backwards 6 to 8 weeks from there. So week 17, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's my window for how long it's going to take to bulk them up. I want to give them an extra week, so like 7 weeks to bulk up, because I like some sturdy tomatoes ready to go. And then I am also going to plan an extra 1 to 2 weeks for germination. So the time it takes from when you plant the seed to when you see that first shoot pop up. So that would put us around week 8. All right. So some varieties are going to take longer to germinate than others. So it might be a good idea to give yourself 2 weeks for germination. Honestly, it takes about 7 to 10 days for germinating for a lot of these varieties. Peppers especially take a little bit longer to germinate, and some of your herbs do as well. So week 8 is going to be my seed planting date, and that is going to be my window for growing my plants indoors. So that wasn't too difficult, was it? That wasn't the end of the world. And you can just work your way down this list. If you aren't happy with the template that I provided here, you can always create your own. I wanted to give you a starting point so that you knew kind of how to design it and where to go from there. I know it's old-fashioned to print it out and to do this by hand, but hey, I'm a little bit of an oldie when it comes to gardening techniques, because sometimes the old ways are the best ways. Not always, not always. But in this case, I enjoy doing it this way. All right, so anyways, that is done. You have a basis for your seed starting schedule, and you've strategized it out, you've planned it out, and all that's left now to do is to gather your materials, set up your germination station. You've got to sow the seeds, and you got to learn all those skill sets that it requires to produce these seedlings. So that's what the rest of these sessions are all about. We are done with step 1 though, and you have a plan. Doesn't it feel a little bit better to know where you're going though? I always feel like having a plan makes you have a semblance of what you're doing and feel a little bit more confident going into actual skills of it all. All right, so there's that. A couple last things to mention before the end of this session. First of all, there are always variabilities when it comes to horticulture. So you might find that your crops take a couple extra weeks to round out before they're ready to transplant, or you might find they finish a couple weeks early. Scheduling is something you become seasoned at as a horticulturist. So don't get discouraged if in your first year things don't go exactly according to your plan. The reason you're watching these sessions and the reason I provided you with this resource is so that you have something to start with. You can use some of my experience to help you not just start in the dark. You've got to have some place to start, and experimentation is everything in horticulture. So don't sweat it. It'll be okay, and enjoy the process. Enjoy the process of discovery that comes with trying something new, trying new varieties, starting your own seeds indoors. All right. So join me in the next session to learn about gathering your materials and why it matters so much in producing quality seedlings.